One of the things that Marvin Minsky, the roboticist, AI researcher, talks about in one of his books. Actually, it might not be the book, I might have just heard an interview with him. But anyway, he talks about numbers. I think he's really talking in relation to a particular way of training AI systems. But he gives the example of numbers, and he says that if we know one thing about a number, like if we know that the number 3, for example, is 1 more than 2, we don't really understand that number, he says. We don't have a lot of information about it. Sorry, I got myself stuck in barbed wire there. We don't have an awful lot of information about it. If we know something else about it, if we know that it's 1 less than 4, and then we know it's the square root of 9, if we know it's the lowest prime number that's not 1, if we know it's the number of sides of a triangle, the smallest plane figure, the smallest number of sides. If we know those things, then we're starting to know a bit more about the number 3. And if we continue that process, if we know that 3 is also the cube root of 27, if we know it's half of 6, if we know that it's what else about 3? Well, if we know a whole series of mathematical things about it, then it starts to take on a different kind of understanding. As you add to that all this sort of cultural stuff we know about Threeness, and embodied stuff we know about Threeness. So, you know, it's the number of 3 little pigs, it's the number of wise men at the nativity. If we know that it's the number of lines in a syllogism, if we know it's the number of lines in a 3-line gag, if we know it's the number of legs in a milking stool, if we know it's the number of blind mice. What's starting to happen as we familiarise ourselves with that Threeness is that it starts to acquire a kind of property, a kind of we seem to acquire a knowledge of it which transcends its information. It's no longer at a certain point, Minsky might say, although I'm seriously adding to what he said here, at a certain point it ceases to be simply a list of facts. It ceases to represent that list of facts. It starts to become part of the machinery of thought, if you like. It starts to become a landmark in the space of knowledge rather than an object that has some sort of transient quality. And that transformation of Threeness as a list of mathematical properties or a set of cultural associations, that transformation from that into almost a felt property, almost like a felt object in the mind, is very significant. When my kids were small, I did a class with them, or a sort of parents' evening information sharing session on numeracy, which was very interesting. One of the exercises they did with us to try to get us to see how difficult numbers were, because it's easy to forget, was a very simple exercise where we had to do mathematical sums in which the numbers were replaced by letters of the alphabet. So as some would say, C plus E plus G. And we'd be told in advance, we'd be shown pictures in which C corresponded to a little picture of 3 horses, and G corresponded to a little picture of 5 trees, and so on. And you had to carry out these additions just using the letters, but not allow yourself to do that translation back into numbers, because that's too easy. You have to see the letter and then visualize the image of the horses or the trees and then do the math from that. It's so difficult, it's so hard, because in a sense it feels like you're going back to the time when numbers didn't have this solidity to them. They weren't part of the structure of your thought. They weren't landmarks in the space of your knowing and being. They were highly friable, highly transient entities. So trying to add those numbers up was an act of memory. It was about, what are the facts about this letter C that will allow me to add it to this letter G, rather than worry the completely instantaneous process that happens when I try to add 3 and 5 now. I don't even think about the facts associated with those numbers. I certainly don't think about them consciously. I just experience a sort of numerical shapes changing, I guess. It's not that I can't even begin to trace what's happening there. But I think I can only do that. Like that miracle of addition can only happen because at some point in my acquaintanceship with mathematics, the individual facts about numbers have cohered and alchemically transformed into some sort of gold standard of number, so that numbers have acquired their status as machinery of thought rather than objects of thought, landmarks in the space of ideas rather than simply objects in that landscape.